Hello, everybody. Welcome into SportsDay Insiders presented by the Dallas Morning News. I am Kevin Sherrington, joined by my old pal David Moore, and also Evan Grant is on the podcast with us today.
That was a joke that I'm not your pal.
I don't think he was joking.
I don't think I was joking. That's right. For those of you who are listening now, you wouldn't know that in the little practice we have, which is very diligent. A lot of research goes into all of it. We spend a lot of time
due diligence.
A lot of due diligence. That Evan was extremely ugly during the entire prep work. Very. I don't want to say dangerous to the success of this podcast, but put us right there on the edge of it. So anyway,
it made for good TV.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So David is back with us after a couple of weeks.
Tell me thank you right now. Tell me thank you right now.
Yeah,
this is over.
Yeah, that's right. Let's thank right now. Let's get our thanks out of the way before something bad happens here.
I am happy to be here with everybody and ready to talk about whatever we're going to talk about. What are we going to talk about, Kevin?
Well, I'll tell you what we're going to talk about. David's been gone for like a month or so, it seems like.
I've been around. I just haven't been on the podcast. You make it sound like I was.
David, we were told that you were.
Made it sound like I was in a sanatorium or something.
Well, we were told you were in treatment in Mexico somewhere. And we were all, putting up prayers and all kinds of stuff for you. It turns out you've just been lying around eating bonbons and drinking wine. So
it was that Ferris Bueller thing,
It was a personal matter, we were told.
Yeah, that's right. David has a lot of personal matters.
No other details were given.
Yeah. So David goes up to the combine and he gets Stephen Jones to sit down and talk to him, and Stephen tells him some interesting stuff, which is kind of unusual for the Jones. I mean, Jerry says interesting stuff all the time. It's just not ever stuff that,
it's like really crazy stuff.
Football.
Yeah.
It's crazy stuff. Yeah.
It's interesting. It just doesn't make any sense.
Exactly. But Stephen told you some things, and one of them being where he just came right out and said, yeah, we're going to have to draft a quarterback. Maybe not have to, but probably will draft a quarterback, because we're not going to retain Cooper Rush or Trey Lance. They're priced out of this market, as they keep reminding us, because of all the money that Dak is making. That's the crux of everything. This will be on Jerry's tombstone. I would have won another one if not for Dak's contract. So anyway, I was surprised to hear that, weren't you, David?
Well, it's I was specifically asking about Trey Lance, and he said, well, because again, he was the guy they traded for, gave up a 4th round pick going into last season. And, he's at the position where he could just walk, and you wouldn't think he would, he had done enough since he was here to command a significant contract. That being said, I don't know that anyone else is going to give him one, but there are other situations where you just haven't made. There are other teams where the highest paid player in the league is not ahead of you as a starting quarterback. So the question was really, focused on him, and it was like, oh no, we expect him to sign elsewhere in free agency, but we would have made that trade again because you do it on a quarterback and this and that. And then he just look. I do think there's still a chance Cooper Rush is back if it's close to what he was making this year. If another team out there looks at him and says, well, this guy's won like 7 games over 3 seasons, is stepping in, and he's really a cost-effective guy, we'll give him a couple million more than Dallas will, and let's go from there. So I do still think there's a chance Cooper Rush is back, because I think arguably his value is higher to the Cowboys than it is another team. Because to me, Cooper Rush is the classic, once you have him in a system and you see him succeed, you love him. I think if you're another team, just looking at him going, I don't, I'm not impressed by the arm strength. I'm not impressed by the mobility, certainly. I can get a younger guy who has more upside in here. Let's do that. So we'll see how it plays out with Cooper Rush. But the ill-fated Trey Lance experiment is done.
Yeah, well, and good for that, because it didn't really ever work out to anything. I'm still not sure, David, what it was they wanted from Trey Lance or what they saw in him to make them think this is something they would want. I get him saying that we would have done this all over again for a 4th-round draft pick, even though that's what they spent on Dak Prescott, and they certainly got more than their money's worth on that. Maybe not so much anymore, but anyway.
I think he was always insurance. I think you remember one of the few times I've ever seen Dak Prescott in a foul mood publicly was right after the trade for Trey Lance, which dropped on the final regular preseason game, the final preseason game that year in 2024. And you could just tell he was a little shorter in how he responded. Wasn't as politic as he normally, but it was clear he was like upset. And I always thought that Trey Lance was not that he was ever going to threaten Dak Prescott's starting position, but he was brought in as insurance in case they couldn't agree on a deal to get someone else in the system, and kind of a subtle, well, look, we have a younger guy here and he's more mobile, and oh yeah, by the way, we gave up a 4th-round pick. Hey, look, you were a 4th-round pick. So I think there was some subtle or not so subtle coercion going on when the pick was made, but that leverage is gone now. The moment Dak signed that big contract extension just a few hours ahead of the opener against Cleveland in September, that the leverage or threat or idea that Trey Lance would be part of this moving forward, I think was what disappeared.
So let me ask you this thing: when you, and I have my own thoughts about this, but when you're drafting a quarterback, or you're going to, as the Cowboys are now, and so you've got a 31-year-old quarterback here, and he's got a big contract in place. So what do you look for in a quarterback at this point? Are you looking for a guy who can step in and just play for you in an emergency? Or are you looking for a guy that, look, this guy might be a little raw, but he's got a lot of tools. We like this guy. We'll let him sit for a couple of years. And then, if it looks like that Dak's, as we start to pay down his contract a little bit and things start to defer a little bit more, that maybe we can even go with this guy after we feel like we've got him to the point we want him.
Well, if, and I do believe they will, but let's say when they invest in quarterback in this draft, it is going to be day 3. I would assume it would be after the 4th round, probably 5th. It depends on who's there in the 4th, because they have some additional 5ths, I think, where it makes sense to go in there. When you're picking a quarterback in day 3, it's all about the upside. I mean, you're not looking for a guy who can come in and start in a pinch and maybe keep the ship afloat until the starter is back. You don't get that on a rookie 5th rounder. 5th round, you're looking at, okay, this guy isn't ready to play, but we like this trait or this ability. Let's get him in here. Let's develop him, see how he learns the system, and go from there. So, yeah, to me, you're taking somebody who 2 to 3 years from now, you're looking at going, well, hey, maybe this franchise does have an option moving on and transitioning to life after Dak Prescott. So that's what you're going for. And when you take a quarterback there, and we look, I will say that Brian Schottenheimer's philosophy on this is very similar to Mike McCarthy's. And Mike McCarthy took a quarterback in his first draft as well, invested 2 years in him, and decided to move on. I think that's what you do when you're taking a quarterback in day 3. You give him a couple years. By then, you should have your arms around whether or not, just where he is and how much more he can develop, if any, and you go from there.
See, to me, the guy you described in this draft is Jalen Milroe.
Oh,
yeah. No, Quinn Ewers, no. Well, Quinn may last until the 5th round. Jalen Milroe will not.
No.
And I think that it to me, if I'm in the 3rd round and Jalen Milroe has not been taken yet, and if I was serious about what you talked about, because what everybody, obviously you see the physical tools on him. He's he reminds you of a Hurts, of a Lamar Jackson. He has that kind of build techniques. He's also a very smart kid. He needs a lot of work with his footwork. He's not he's not consistently accurate. Sorry. So he's got a ton of upside, probably more than anybody other quarterback in this draft. He's just not ready to step in right now and start for anybody. And but I think that someone's going to see all that. Obviously, they see all that ability, and he'll go before that. Would the Cowboys, if he were there in the third round, do you think they would take a flyer on him?
Given the positions they need to address, third seems a little high to me. Now again, but I mean, if he's rated clearly above anyone else on their draft board, they would be foolish not to do it. But I would just think, and I know we're going to dive into this a little bit deeper the closer we get to the draft, but they need to get some more young offensive linemen, defensive linemen, corners, receivers, running back. I just don't know how you ignore whatever position it is you haven't addressed out of those five with your third pick in this draft to take a quarterback.
You've got your
who isn't
third
going to
pick
play
has got
for
to
you.
start. Your third pick's got to start for you or play significant amount of.
He's got to play a lot. I wouldn't know if he starts, but he's got to play.
He's got to play.
He's got to be a significant part of the rotation, particularly coming off a 7-10 year. When you let 7 starters walk in free agency the year before, when you've had 2 substandard draft classes in terms of production from those draft classes, and a couple of guys hurt who aren't going to be able to contribute for you early this next year. Yeah, I just think that's too much to ask and overcome. I think you've got to go on the positional needs.
Yeah, and I think that if you get to the fourth round, I don't think Jalen Milroe is going to be there. I agree that the fourth round and beyond is where you start talking about upside and upside alone. I don't think Milrose will be there when you get there.
Milroe, not Rose.
Well, I keep getting him his last name always mixed up.
You're thinking of the relays, the Melrose relays.
Yeah.
Well, let me throw this.
Wait, hang on. I mean, look,
you're thinking about Lily Rose.
The first 2 quarterbacks will go will be Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward, right? And they'll go in the first round.
Yeah.
Probably.
So, do you think that there will not be another quarterback taken in the second or third round?
No, because at this point, the third best quarterback everybody thinks is Jackson Dart from Ole Miss.
Yeah.
And so I there's some thought that he probably, because of the offense they ran at Ole Miss, that's the one thing going for Quinn Ewers is that he's not going to go in the first round. He's not going to go in the second. I would be surprised if Quinn went in the third round. Is that the one thing going for him is that he played in a pro style offense with Steve Sarkisian. That's what everybody likes about. That's one of the things they like about him. They like about the receivers as well. But this is the thing that you guys aren't taking into consideration.
Quarterbacks go higher than you think, though.
They always do. Absolutely.
And actually, I would argue in a draft where you don't have as many at the top with first round picks, that really does benefit Ewers. I could see him jumping up a couple more rounds than what people envision the actual talent is, because
you might be right about that. That is the thing. It's a draft full of backup quarterbacks, if you ask me. But here's the thing: in 2020, in the second round, the Philadelphia Eagles took Jalen Hurts while they still had Carson Wentz, and everybody said, "Oh, what a crazy pick that was." Jalen Hurts is not ready to play. You've got Carson Wentz. You just signed him to this huge contract. And what's happened since then?
Who was the GM that did that?
Howie Roseman did that.
There you go.
There you go. So I'm not saying that I would do that. I'm just saying these are things that, to me, you got to have everything available to you when you make these picks. And we're going to talk about that in a minute here, but just get an idea of some preliminary stuff on what the Cowboys could do in the first round. But before we go there, David, I want to ask you, was there anything at the combine this year that stood out to you? Any shocks, surprises, anything like that?
Well, just to keep it on the Cowboys for a second, I always maintain that the first sign on whether or not the Cowboys would approach this offseason differently than they have in the last 5 to 6 years or more, you can add to that simply, would be how they proceeded with Osa Odighizuwa. Because to me, he was the classic he is the classic guy of very good, solid player, good return on your draft investment, good young player, dependable, hard worker, everything you want in your program, but falls just short of that Pro Bowl top tier level.
High
And
floor, lower ceiling.
yeah, yeah. And those are players that the Cowboys have traditionally allowed to walk rather than sign to a second contract. And this is a big part of their draft and develop philosophy, right? And I'll give an example from last year. Tyler Biotish, to me, kind of fit that profile, right? A very good player. Now he wound up in the Pro Bowl last year because of that the the chicanery that goes on in the Pro Bowl and guys going 4, 5, 6 deep down because they're not playing,
I
and then
love
say
a
Pro
little bit
Bowl.
of chicanery.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. Pro
You know,
bogus.
but again, he's a very good player who's not an elite or perennial Pro Bowl player, but just that step below. They let him walk last year because they went, hey, this is a really good year for our offensive line. We can get a starting center and plug him in there, which is what they did with BB when they moved him over. Now, I think, but this year to me, Osa was going to be the test because Osa fits that to a T. Very good player, just short of a Pro Bowl level. You look at the dominant defensive tackles in the league, you're never going to mention him in the same breath. But he's that next level, right? Where he is on that level's up for debate. Um, and when I talked to Steven last week on the eve of it, he made it very clear that we've already started negotiations with him. We want to bring him back. Now he's not back yet, but Stephen Jones would not have said that. He understands the heat this organization is under. He understands what the criticisms are of what they didn't do last off season. For him to say and offer, hey, we've already begun negotiations with Osa Odighizuwa, tells me that they feel pretty confident they can get it done. Because coming off of last offseason, would anything look worse than to say, oh, yeah, we're talking to Osa Odighizuwa and then let him walk in free agency? It's not going to happen.
Well, that
So,
leads me to one question, David.
yeah,
Does that suggest to you that the Cowboys want to bring Odighizuwa back because A, they realize that they need to keep some of these solid high floor, low ceiling guys around, or are they going to bring him back because they simply can't afford to lose anybody else? Is this a question of a change in philosophy or simply desperation to have bodies?
I think it's more door number two. Now, that being said, in past years, I think they still would have said goodbye. We'll make it work in the draft somehow because the rest of our team's strong enough. I think they saw last year the rest of their team, because of these last two draft classes, they're not in a position to let Osa walk at this time. Let's play this out. You let Osa walk. Who do you have that has any skins on the wall in the interior of the defensive line? You have your
No.
first round pick from 2 years ago who still hasn't obtained the level that a first round pick would indicate in Mozzie Smith. You let Osa go. All you have is Mozzie for your two defensive tackle spots on the inside. You have a lot of heavy lifting to do. You're going to have to overpay for a veteran to plug in who's probably not going to be as good as Osa. So I think, frankly, in part because Mozzie Smith hadn't played to the level that they had hoped he would, that I think their hands are tied, and I think that's why you're seeing these, negotiations with Osa. I will say this: I do think they'll get him signed to a long-term deal. I don't know if it's going to be by the time the franchise or transition tags have to be placed on a player by Tuesday afternoon. Um, I would anticipate that they are far enough along and they feel good enough they'll sign him to a long-term deal, that they will place the franchise tag on him if they don't have a deal by tomorrow, just to make sure he doesn't leave, and then work something out. And then once they do, just remove the franchise tag.
Kevin, does that answer from David make you feel about why the Cowboys would try to re-sign Odighizuwa make you feel better or worse about the future of the organization?
I never look at anything with them as a real sign until I see the indications on the field. They talk about stuff and it doesn't mean anything. Look, Odighizuwa had 4.5 sacks last year. That's a lot for an interior lineman, and he was high on the free agent board. If you're looking at how people were ranking free agent defensive tackles, he was pretty far up there. I think that because, as David noted, the people
He
who
was
have
top
walked,
20 overall of free agents available this year
sure.
in something,
So because of the players who have walked in recent years, and guys have gone on and done pretty well in other places, right? Connor Williams went on and had a pretty nice career in other places. There were guys, just like David said, they got a little too arrogant in my mind about their draft ability, and they think, well, you can always replace this guy. Well, sometimes it's a wise philosophy to keep you from overpaying, right? But
Sure.
every once in a while, you have to look at something and say, is there something about this guy that makes him a little bit different from some of the other guys that we have used this philosophy on? And two, are we really confident in this draft and maybe in the one after that the replacements for these guys? It's like going into this draft. There's going to be a lot of defensive tackles, right? But you can't draft more than, maybe you could draft more than one. I don't know, but you couldn't possibly expect two rookies to come in and play. One you could to make an impact, but not in an immediate way.
And then if you did that, where do you leave yourself at running back, at cornerback, where they have a crying need, really, because of where Trayvon Diggs is coming back off another major injury. So that they have too many positions to fill to do it, to let him go, in my mind. Now, the next indicator, I think, is Micah Parsons and his extension. Will that happen sooner rather than later? And I think, we'll see. That's going to be really. I think his situation is much different than CeeDee Lamb last year. CeeDee Lamb wanted to drag his feet. He was waiting to see what Jefferson was going to get. There were still other receivers in the market receiving deals. There aren't any other pass rushers equivalent to Micah Parsons who are up for a contract right now. So you're going to make him the highest paid guy at the position because that's how it works. There's no one else to negotiate off of now because there's not another deal out there. This is your third defensive coordinator in 3 years with Micah Parsons. You want him in the building in the offseason, not taking the CeeDee Lamb. Well, let's get this resolved, then I'll be out there and I'll be, ready to go. So I also think the climate is different to get Parsons done sooner in this, really in the next couple of months here that you did not happen with CeeDee Lamb last year. And then if they do that, I think there is to me, that's a clear signal after retaining Osa that, okay, let's handle some business here. Let's get it done early. Have it done early. We have a new head coach. Let's not give him headaches. Let's not test his tolerance for ambiguity, as Jerry Jones likes to say. Let's get this in place and go.
All right, before we get out of this Cowboys segment, I do want us just to kind of to give people, a little build up as we go in toward the draft in April, an idea of where the Cowboys might be headed with that first pick anyway, with the 12th pick of the draft. We've heard obviously that there's Ashton Jeanty is available, might be available at 12. He has always been considered the probably the only first round back, although now people like Mel Kiper are saying Omarion Hampton from North Carolina is a guy who could possibly go in the first round as well. Bigger than Jeanty, maybe not really probably any slower. He's about 221 pounds. He's a banger with a little bit of speed. But David, do you feel like in this draft, what are all the directions they could possibly go with that 12th pick?
Well, but given on where and we'll have a more definitive view of how the positional rankings are holding up and a consensus there in over the next 2 to 3 weeks. But right now, I do believe they'll address offensive line in this draft. I don't believe the way this draft is currently constructed that you'll get an offensive lineman that would make sense at 12. So let's take that off the board, move it to day 2 where it becomes stronger consideration. I think there are going to be some defensive tackles worthy there, but if you're going to put that money in Osa and you just spent a first round pick on a tackle a couple of years ago, I don't see 12 being used on a tackle. So to me, what you're looking at is an edge rusher, a corner, a running back, or, and I would not minimize this, a receiver. I think one of those four positions is there, and you want to talk about the combine and guys who and and this is a cautionary tale, right? Because we've seen guys have great workouts at the combine, jump up, and then that's different than actual playing on the field. You see it less now, but you've had it before. But a guy, I think, look, I think this is a good receiver class. From what people are saying, you don't have the definitive, you know, ladders built at the top for you. You don't have a clear number 1, 2, 3, I think, in my mind. A lot of people came out of Indianapolis going, I'm not so sure that Matthew Golden isn't the first receiver taken because
He was
of
the
his time
fastest
in the
at the
40.
combine. Yeah, he
Yeah.
ran a 4.29, which is only 1/100th of a second off the fastest time
Yeah.
at the combine. Yeah, he's and one thing I like about Matthew Golden, I was never impressed so much with his speed as I was his hands and his route running. And he was good on 50-50 balls. And he was
Hmm.
very dependable for Texas and Quinn Ewers this last year. So that's certainly a thought. My problem with drafting wide receivers in the first round is that they are so expensive now.
Sure.
And you just had to pay CD Lamb, and then in a few years you're going to have to pay Matthew Golden if you take him there as well. I'm not
Yeah.
saying you wouldn't take him, and I'm with you. I think all four of those positions are inarguable that the Cowboys need improvement at, and so I think at that point, this makes it to me an easier draft for the Cowboys with that first pick. With you got four positions that you just named, and you could even leave in the other two, an offensive line if you wanted as well, or a defensive line. And there's bound to be somebody there. And at that point, because this draft is not considered stock full of blue chippers, that you better take the best guy available
Yeah.
at that point, don't you?
Yeah. And this, I will say this draft is deeper at running back than it has been. If you
Right.
don't take your running back in the first, you come back and you get him in the second or the third, and he's going to help you upgrade that position. So, and Stephen Jones also made it very clear their almost obstinate, approach to taking a running back these last couple of years will not be the case this year. They will take a running back, and it'll be in the first 2 days of the draft. But here's an interesting question. We'll debate this more. If the running back draft is deeper, I think the Cowboys have some nice number 3 receivers on down on this team, and they have a clear number 1. They do not have a second receiver. They just don't, and that would really open up the offense a lot. So I would not take that off the board either. But yeah, it's going to be. But again, Ashton Genty certainly up there, and like you say, Omarion Hampton. You started hearing more of a buzz for him coming out of Indianapolis than you did going in.
Yeah. Yeah, well, he's a big guy. I like the thing I like about big running backs is that if you got a leaky offensive line, it's nice to have a guy who can break a tackle and make his own hole for himself. So
Yeah, and don't
we'll
read
see.
too much into this, but because they do 40 plus interviews with players while they were there. But 2 running backs I do know they interviewed are Omarion Hampton and Caleb Johnson.
How about that? All right, well, that's good to know. All right,
They
that's
didn't
going
need
to
to
do
do
it.
Genty. I mean, Genty's going to be here. They didn't. They were talking to some other guys. Ashton Genty will come in for a visit.
Well, we're sure that he will. All right, so that's going to do it for the Cowboys segment of our podcast. We're going to move over now and talk about the Rangers. Evan has been back in his lovely abode off of Singleton. Yeah, I'll give everybody his exact address so they can send their cards and letters to
That'll
him
be good.
there.
That'll really up the security at home while I'm gone. That's a good idea.
So, Evan, you're going back as we're taping this on Monday. You're going back on Tuesday. How do you feel that everything is going to look after leaving the paper in the hands of Sean McFarland while you were away?
Well, I want to know what Sean's done with Kumar Rocker because he has not had a good spring. Um, and I don't know if that is a case of Kamar being a little bit deliberate with his stuff. I don't know if it's that he's just been rusty location wise. I don't know if the fact that the Arizona Springs have an impact on movement on balls. I don't know what it is, but the numbers at least have looked discouraging from two outings in which he's gone basically an inning apiece and given up 4 runs in each outing. So that's probably the one thing that stands out to me as a potential concern. It appears that Wyatt Langford is back on the field, so that seems to have settled itself. And I do think the news that's coming out today is that it appears that Bruce Bochy indicated first to Joel Sherman and then to our own Sean that Jacob deGrom is going to start game number 5 of the regular season. That's the plan for him to start.
Fine.
I find that interesting. One, I expected that he wouldn't start opening day, and I expected he'd start later rather than sooner in that first turn of the rotation. But by starting him in game 5, you're starting him in Cincinnati on the road. That's his first start, and he'd be starting in Chicago when you go there to Wrigley Field the first week of April. And I would think you'd want to do everything you could to avoid those 2 spots. If you started him in the 4th spot, you could. I just worry that it's going to be really cold in one of those places, and you may have to say, maybe not today, Jacob.
Well, yeah. Well, what would be the reason for holding him back that long anyway?
Well, he still hadn't pitched in a game, and so I think they're giving him some extra time to build up. And I think as the 5th starter, I haven't had a chance to talk with Boach yet, and so I don't know that they'll ever plan to skip him. But you could always do that occasionally with the 5th starter, skip him a turn, and let him get extra rest. I just think the first time out of the gate, I'd rather have him start on Sunday afternoon here against Boston, miss Cincinnati entirely, come back, face Tampa Bay here, and then potentially miss the Cubs and then pitch in Seattle. And you can do that by just keeping in the 4th spot and keeping the rotation true the first couple times out. So I'll be interested to hear what the answers to that thought are. As far as anything else with this club right now, it's so far they've been pretty fortunate. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot of thoughts on where this club is because there haven't been a whole lot of really significant developments. Rocker's 2 starts are really the one thing that stand out for me.
I would have to think if if he doesn't have a good start this next time out, that his chances of being in the opening day rotation are pretty slim.
I mean, I think I think the way I'd tweak that is I think he's going to have to come out this next time out, pitch really well, and build off of that each successive time. I think one more slip up wherever it comes is going to be enough for the Rangers to say, let's not rush things. Let's make sure you're in the best position for success. And if that means, you get a few more starts at Round Rock, remember, he's only had 3 starts at Round Rock, 4 starts at Round Rock. I think he's had about 5 starts above or 10 starts above uh, Class A. So it wouldn't surprise me if the Rangers said, let's just tamp it down. They've got 5 healthy starters,
Well,
and
that's the
Jack Leiter
point.
has
Is that
actually pitched fairly well. So
you've got enough other guys who are pitching well, and I don't really see the upside of running Rocker out there over Dane Dunning or Cody Bradford. Cody Bradford pitched well last year. I guess he's looked fine this spring. Dane Dunning did not pitch well last year, but he had a really good year in 2023.
he was their
And
pitcher of the year in 23, and he's come out this spring and he's been effective, and Leiter's been effective. I think the Rangers are probably going to need Dunning in long relief early, particularly with Tyler Mahle and deGrom both probably going short first few times. I think he would be valuable there, but you could have a 5-man rotation that goes Evaldi, John Gray, Malley, Bradford, just to split up those two guys who are going to go short, and then DeGrom if you go with him in the 5th spot.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say there seems to be some momentum gathering nationally. Everybody's saying now that the West is wide open. When you say wide open, I guess when you talk about from the standpoint, there's not a clear-cut favorite. But I would certainly say that the teams right underneath that, obviously, the Mariners, the Astros, the Rangers, they're all up for it, and the A's are better. And so I don't give the Angels any shot at all. But at this point, doesn't it feel like to you though that we say that kind of thing going into the season, and then one of those 3 teams just puts everything together, and then just kind of I don't say that they're not going to run away with it, but I don't see that being a 3-way dogfight all the way through the season.
You talking about the Rangers, Astros, and
Mariners?
Yeah. I listen. The way I look at this division right now, it's hard for me to figure out where the Astros are going. I just think that the lack of the amount of talent that walked out the door with both Kyle Tucker and Alex Bregman leaving this offseason is significant. Not to mention,
let me ask you about that real quick. Can you imagine if that had happened here?
Yeah.
What we'd be saying? I don't understand, and I don't know how it's going.
I don't know what we'd be saying, Kevin, if it had happened here in the same way that it happened in Houston. They've had 7 years of play. I mean, they've had almost a decade of dominance, and some point in time, those guys do walk out. But yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. I mean, it's 2 huge losses for them in my mind. Bregman was, and Bregman and Altuve compromised the leadership in that clubhouse, or comprised the leadership in that clubhouse.
Or maybe compromised it. They might have done that too. But it wasn't even just those 2. Remember, it's Correa before that. It was
Verlander.
Verlander. It was also the center fielder who's dropped off my senile radar here. That they let walk a few years ago.
Yeah.
So they have
George Springer.
George Springer, right? And so they have let a lot of talent walk.
Yeah.
And as you said, that does happen. But when you see guys. I mean, the Red Sox thought enough of Bregman to give him 3 years, $120 million, and I know that's a lot of money. You can say what you want, but it's one thing for your empire to kind of fall apart. I mean, people can maybe justify that, but when you let it just walk away, that's a bad look.
Yeah. I mean, it is a bad look. And I will say that, probably the Astros get some degree, I'm not going to say a pass, but they probably get the benefit of the doubt right now based on the success that they've had. That said, I mean, for me, it's hard for me to see how Houston improves over last year with those guys lost. It's hard for me to see how Seattle improves over last year because I don't think they've done anything significant to their offense, which was again, their biggest shortcoming in 2024. And look, they've had an awful good run of health in the starting rotation. If they get an injury in that starting rotation, which is their backbone, it does leave them with no margin for error. And I want to bring up something that Chris Young said. He's kind of said to me and kind of alluded to me, and he said it to Tim Calishaw this weekend, that, look, the way the Rangers look at this thing, you have to have an elite offense to win, okay? Everything works off of that. And so what did the Rangers do? They tried to reinforce their offense and remake their offense to get them back to 2023. If you do that and you've got a decent rotation, you're going to contend. If you do that with a good rotation, you're really going to be in good shape. And on the backside, it gives you a little bit more margin of error to what you need to work with on the bullpen. So I feel like the Rangers targeted this in a very direct fashion. And I'm just not sure that Seattle has done the same thing to address what their needs are to take the next step.
No, they haven't. And let's talk about Chris Young a little bit because,
because he's the only GM in town. Well, I guess him and Jim Nill are the only GMs in town not under fire.
Yeah. Well, yeah. People are more concerned if there was a D on the end of that. If they're going to be fired. They would like that a lot better than just being under fire. We've seen Chris at work now, right? It was hard to tell exactly Chris's impact on the team when John Daniels was still the president, because it was hard to say how much of this is John, how much of this is Chris. I think we can certainly tell, though, now since then, and maybe we had an idea of it, and certainly you did more so than me. But now we get an idea of what kind of GM Chris Young is, and in my mind, it is more. If the two ends of the spectrum are John Daniels and AJ Preller, he's closer to the Preller side of the scale than he is to the John Daniels side.
Yeah, I think that CY wants to hear his inner circle's opinion, and he'd like some consensus, but he's not necessarily wed to consensus if he feels strongly enough about something. If his belief, again, as a player, and if he feels it fits or it needs to be done, I think he's more willing to act independently than I think JD was. I think that's the biggest difference that I see in terms of how they manage things. Or it may be that CY is just, or that Chris is just more willing to be out front and say, I did this, or, I'm not taking credit, but just claiming responsibility for deals. And there's a case to be made for that. But I do think, to your point, the difference for me is that, yeah, I see a guy who is a little bit more willing to go it alone without consensus on certain issues.
Certainly more impatient than JD was. Too.
Yeah, I definitely more. That's always such a hard one. Like, I think there's a time where you would say more impatient, and then there's a time where you would say more aggressive, and there's different connotations on both of those.
And that's what when I say impatient, I don't mean that in a bad way. Just that a guy, he doesn't want to sit around and wait for something to happen. He thinks he has a pretty good idea of who these guys are, and as he and I discussed the fact that, because in my annual regrets column, I talked about how I was sorry that I wrote that the Rangers would continue to slug, because they didn't. And he texted me and said, "Hey, I was right there with you. I thought we were going to slug too, and we just didn't." And so, so he learned that lesson. He comes back this winter. He goes out and gets a couple of guys who can hit fastballs, and it gets him another catcher. Because that was, and I think you and I have talked about that. That was a mistake at catcher. Clearly, Jonah was catching too many games, at least for him, to be effective. And so they've made some moves and done some things. It's just that you don't really go past any offseason or even trade deadline where Chris is not thinking, yeah, we need to do something. It may not be a huge move, but we're going to do something here that's at least a mid-level kind of move.
He's more aggressive at this stage. Let me put it this way. He's more aggressive at this stage than I think John was towards the end of his tenure with the Rangers. There were some moves that JD made early on that were aggressive, and they didn't necessarily work out, right? The Danks for McCarthy deal. I don't know that they got anything for Alfonso Soriano, or
makes you
for
less
that matter,
likely to do them
Chris
as
Young.
you go along. Yeah. Which makes you less likely to do them.
You're exactly right, David. I think those kind of things, there were two things that happened. One, just like, wow, can't believe that didn't work out. And then those guys who may have talked him into those things, a guy like AJ Preller, left. And so that end of his sounding board was gone. And so I think that John got just a little more hesitant to make those kinds of decisions anymore. And I don't know that he was afraid. I don't think, I would never characterize him as being afraid of them.
No,
just more careful.
But let's also acknowledge this, right? I mean, when he needed to be aggressive in certain things to make this team significantly better, he was.
Oh, sure. Cole Hamels. Look at that.
Cole Hamels, Cliff Lee, both of those were significant trades. I think, to your point, and this was not to compare the two too much, but I do think that I see a GM who tilts towards aggressive with Chris Young.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, and I'm just a stupid sports writer, but I love an aggressive GM. We talked about Howie Roseman a while ago. Look how aggressive. Why do people like him? Because he's aggressive. He's constantly tinkering with things and figuring out ways to go. And in my maybe that's easier to do in football in some ways because you don't have the same contracts. They're not long-term deals, and so you don't get kind of caught up in things like you do in baseball. But Dave Dombrowski, that was his entire general managing career was that I don't care about these draft picks. I'm playing for now. We're going to win now. And if we don't win now, then I'll move on to the next place, and I will win now there. And
Kevin,
I tell you, I
I'm
admire
doing
that.
top 30 prospects, right? We're running down our top 30 Rangers prospects every day. We started about a week ago. It'll wind up with our special section on March 23rd. I'm through. I've written about 20 of these already, and my question is, of those 30, how many guys are actually going to significantly contribute for the Texas Rangers? So people do need to know that they are, and I hate this dehumanizes prospects, but they are in a lot of ways collateral or equity or a commodity. And so you don't want to fall too in love with that, but you also don't want to you want to properly value them. And I think Chris Young has taken an approach that leans more towards we're going to use these guys to make sure we get guys who already know how hard it is to play in the big leagues and who have met some level of success. That's when you take the unpredictability out of it. And every manager, every GM would like to tell you, we would like to be a little bit more predictable about how our team performs.
Oh, no question about it. And that's the thing. If and I know it's one of the things you talked about is the fact that the Rangers farm system has dropped in evaluation by a lot of organizations or these subsidies that do this kind of thing. But if you hit with Wyatt Langford, if Evan Carter is able to play, full time, if Josh Young comes back and plays at an all-star caliber, well, it doesn't matter what the farm system is because you just locked up 3 positions right there for the next 10 years. And that's the beauty of that. If you hit on those, no one needs to be hitting that much on mid-level guys. A guy who's just maybe a starter. Josh Smith is a very nice player to have. They traded for him and then he came up. But you don't need to be hitting on those. Those are the kind of guys you can sign for reasonable dollars. The thing that you have to hit on is stars. And that's where if this, let's take Sebastian Walcott, for example. Here's a guy that he's 18 years old. He might be 2 years away from the big leagues, at 20. That's pretty remarkable.
But I wouldn't even say stars. I would go back to the conversation we just had with David about high floor, a little bit lower ceilings.
Yeah.
You draft so much for star power. I get that. But if you get a team full of solid, predictable contributors, you're going to be in pretty good shape to get to the tournament. And I do think the Rangers have gotten from Carter, Young, Langford. That's a really good start for contributions from everyday players. I don't know if they're going to be long-term all-stars or not, but that's a good start. Now, if one of Jack Leiter or Kumar Rocker or Alejandro Rosario, who's going to be out for this year with Tommy John surgery, or Jose Corniel, who's coming back from Tommy John surgery, or somebody else hits as a starter, you've put yourself over the top. That's a 4-man core. That's what the Yankees built off of in the 90s. You get a 4-man core, you've got a real foundation on which to build and can use your collateral from your farm system to trade for other things and can supplement what you need with free agency.
Well, and that's what, just going back to the winter when and that was Chris Young's first winter as GM of the title, and John Daniels was still the president when they signed, Corey Seager and Marcus Semien. That was 2 superstars that you signed up the middle, and people kind of thought, well, that's a little crazy for the Rangers, isn't it? And now looking back, that was the cornerstone of their World Series teams.
That was the jump start to the rebuild.
Signing those guys takes the pressure off everything else. So, but you can't keep doing that, and certainly Ray Davis has shown he's not going to keep doing that. So,
and I do think Ray has been clear, and I think it's fair. I mean, this predates Chris Young, but I think Ray does want to see some progress on the pitching side because look, if you develop your own pitching, pitching is so volatile and it's so expensive on the free market. If you develop one or two of your own pitchers, it does allow you so much more flexibility and latitude on how you build a team.
Yeah, no question about that. I want to ask you one last thing here about before we get out, because I raised this question in my newsletter today about Walcott. So he's a shortstop right now. Is his long-term future at shortstop?
That's going to be a column for another day, because you look around the league now, right? And you see L.A. De La Cruz and you see the other, you see O'Neill Cruz, you see these guys who are like 6'7" playing shortstop, and that would have been unheard of 15 years ago. But look, 30 years ago, it was unheard of for anybody over 6 feet to be playing shortstop. And then the Ripkins and the Alex Rodriguez's, and the Nomars all came along. So we are seeing some degree of a change there. And I don't know if he'll end up staying at shortstop or eventually move to third base, but he's played a decent amount of third base last year. And so I think the Rangers are keeping that in mind, because there are different ways they could go. And if you're thinking about which is going to be the quicker route to the big leagues, I think your odds would basically say that, given Josh Young's history, there's probably going to be there's more likely to be an opportunity at third base than at shortstop.
I'm going to say this. I'm going to say he plays his first major league game in right field.
We'll see. I mean,
for one thing, the whole Corey Seager question is Corey's 31, right? And so, he's probably got 4 years left in him at shortstop. He's not going to want to move from shortstop. I can tell you that. And so, do you really want to let, Sebastian just kind of loiter around for another, 4 years? I don't think so. He looks like a big leaguer right now. I think they need to be checking this guy's passport. I think he's like 26. He's 18 years old. It reminded me when I was in high school. When I was 18, I looked like I was 12. If put the two of us standing next to each other at 18, it's like these are people from different planets, man. That's unbelievable that this guy's as mature as he is. So I don't know. I think it'll be very interesting, but it is a thing to remember. There are very few guys I would say, this guy's untradeable, but that guy looks untradeable to me. To be as mature as he seems physically and mentally for an 18-year-old, that's quite a prospect.
Well, again, I mean, you wait and see, like, because of your situation, if you don't feel you're going to move him to the outfield and you can make a blockbuster trade either at the deadline that gets you multiple controllable guys, or in the winter, that's something you owe it to yourself to at least examine. But yeah, this is a kid that's going to be in the top 20 prospects this year in all of baseball, and by the end of the year could be top 10. And you're talking, with the exception of Jurix and Profar, you're talking franchise caliber players. So
yeah, and been a lot of those for the Rangers. All right, that's going to do it for our Rangers segment of our podcast. We're going to move over now and talk a little Mavericks and NBA, Lakers.
David, not Mavericks talk.
Evan, calm down.
It's not.
We're going to talk about the Mavericks too, Evan. I know that you hate the Mavericks and you don't want to talk about them. Every week when we're planning on this, he said, do we have to talk about the Mavericks? Can't we just talk about the Rangers the whole time?
I'm happy to keep going over the Luka stuff. I just think that right now the interest is Luka and not really the Mavericks.
No, you're right about that.
You don't want to talk about the PR masterstroke of announcing that you're going to raise ticket prices next year?
Oh, I didn't see that. Have they already made that announcement?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God. Oh, my gosh. Talk about timing. That's some really bad timing there.
Been a good month here. Yeah.
Ticket
prices go up, I think 8.6% or something like that.
Well, that's good to know.
Speaking of which, do you think, given everything that's taken place, right, and over the last 2 weeks, from the trade, or 3 weeks, from the trade to Darrell Armstrong getting arrested, to the stuff that Dumont has said, to the videos, do you think it might have been
injuries on the guys who are brought in with the trade, to
just one bad thing after another,
video team, to raising ticket prices?
You think it might have been a good idea for for the Adelsons and Dumont to basically go to the city of Irving and say, about this thing we'd like to get done there. Maybe let's hold off on that just a couple of months to let the heat blow over. Because it could have been very easy for Brad to write the other day a lead that basically said, well, after all, it does look like the Mavericks are going to leave the city of Dallas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And speaking of that story, in talking about being tone deaf, I don't think that they mind that in the least. I don't think that the Adelson family looks at it. They look at it like, yeah, this is our investment here, and we may very well take the team to Irving.
Yeah, because it's part of like you said, it's a holding. For Cuban, it was a business, sure, but it was a passion. For the Adelsons, it's a holding, and it is part of an amenity that would go in a resort that they expect to be a casino and gaming place.
Yeah.
There's a difference if you're part of a community and ingrained in that community versus owning the asset from afar. There just is. You're not going to have the attachment. You're going to view it more as an asset than, okay, what part of this is, what you just have a different sense. If you don't live in an area, you don't have a sense for that area and what people are going to, what's going to upset them, that's why you've always had the argument against, I hate to call it absentee ownership, because you can still be a very engaged owner and just not live in the city.
Lamar Hunt.
But Lamar Hunt's one too. Yeah, exactly.
But you guys, David, right? What years did you cover the Mavericks?
Several different, usually during their dark period, which was extended
when they were terrible,
for a while.
they sent David out to cover it.
Did you do the beat at all in the 80s?
Yeah, I did. Well, okay. I did their first couple of years here with the team.
Okay, and Kevin, you've seen them since their inception, right? I mean, you've seen them really since you've been in town.
Sure.
And I came along in 98, so I missed that late 80s, early 90s rush. And when I got here, they were a nothing franchise. And what I watched transpire over 25 years was them build a real connection, an enviable connection to the city of Dallas and the community. And it just seems like every step they're taking along the way is designed to erode that.
Well, I'm going to tell you something that Mitch Lawrence, our old pal, former SportsDay staffer, and I were talking about just last night about this very thing. And I said, he puts the blame on Patrick Dumont and on the Adelsons for Luka going. He says that ultimately they're the ones who should have told Nico no. And I said, yes, I agree with that to a point. But what's happened here is that this was a perfect storm of terrible events, right? Where you had a new owner coming in. They don't care anything about the basketball franchise. All they care about is getting a casino here with a basketball team in the middle of it. That's all they care about. For everybody who kept saying they want to move the team to Vegas, they've got Vegas. They want to be in Texas. They want to tap.
Never been about Vegas. Never.
No, they want to tap this huge, a possibility of getting casino gambling here. All these people who've been driving to Oklahoma, driving to Shreveport.
There's competition in Vegas. If they get the first casino here, they're going to have the market. They're going to steal the market from Oklahoma entirely, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And they're going to be the first. I mean, business wise, it's a very smart move.
Sure. And the problem with that is that what we've seen is that Patrick Dumont said, that Rick Welch said, the new president of the franchise, and he's a well-respected NBA veteran, but both of them were quoted saying, well, we just didn't imagine this kind of blowback for the Luka trade. It's like, okay, first of all, the rest of the NBA saw that. Everybody else, you saw players. Kevin Durant called it insane twice in one conversation. There have been multiple athletes who have said this and people who have said it. But I think when you haven't been in this market and you don't understand the fact that, it's a little bit of the story here is that, okay, the Mavericks have been pretty good over the last, at several points over the last decade or so, over the last 20 years, but they only won one title. And for most of their history, they haven't been very good. And so people identify with the player more than they identify with the franchise because of that, especially a homegrown superstar like Luka, which what are the chances that they ever get that again? They may sign a guy, they may trade for a guy, but they're never going to grow a guy that was a 5-time first team All NBA player before he was 25 years old.
And
That
to
just
do it
doesn't
back to
happen.
back, was a rare
Yes, you went
thing.
from
And
there was the baton pass from Dirk right to Luka. It was like this was perfect.
and it's
And
like
And
as
so
now,
many of the
beloved as
cultural elements were the same too, right? You had a European kid come over here as a teenager. All these things that they saw in Dirk, Luca embodied that. And then there was the
times two
friendship
and the
between
potential to
Luca
be
and Dirk.
better.
oh,
Yes, and could be
absolutely,
better taking it to
he
that
is
next
better,
step.
no question,
Yeah.
no question.
Yeah.
So, Dave, let's get some of your thoughts because you cover the NBA and you stay very much in touch with all of that. Just first of all, your thoughts about just the trade itself and what they got in return.
Well, again, the very quickly back on the argument of it goes on DeMont and Adelson. It does, but I will also say when you purchase a franchise and you have a general manager in place who you say you empower to make decisions, you listen to them. You don't, on their first major thing, they come to you and say, you want to get this done. If you're going to tell them, no, I question, your thinking on this, then they shouldn't be there in the first place. But that
I agree
comes,
with that, and that's what I told Mitch, by the way.
yeah, and so
Although the one thing I would say on that, David, is there are exceptions, right? That should be the rule, but there is an exception. And when you've got what you've got in Luca,
well, the fact Dumont's radar did not go off and say, wait a second, let's dig a little deeper into this. What's going on here? How much of this is personality driven? How much of this is just a feel that you can't quantify? And if so, why do you have that feel? And
and if
but
there's some real insubordination, let's try and address that internally. Let's make a
yes,
more concerted effort to
yes.
address that internally before we decide we're going to blow up this fan base. And what I said on last week, Kevin, we never addressed that last week's podcast never really got on the air.
Oh, that's right, it didn't. We're sorry about that. Technical difficulties.
There were some technical difficulties, but it was an award winner of a podcast.
It wasn't the
Yeah, it was
content.
really
It wasn't
good
the
stuff.
content. Yeah.
And
It might have been our best one ever.
I do think I made one coherent statement, which is the first I've made in a decade of doing this. And that is what the Mavericks set themselves up for is that with this trade, they have to win this trade, to win back their fans. They don't just have to win a championship. They've got to win more championships than the Lakers do with Luka. That's the only way for them to come out on top. Now, can you build it back if you do that? Absolutely. But that's a really high bar to cross.
Well, one of the things too, and David, I want to point out about this, the question you just brought up is that from what we understand, Nico had been kind of banging on Dumont's ears about Luka for a while, and about his unhappiness with his conditioning, his leadership, all these kind of things. This had been going on for a while.
Let me say very quickly about his conditioning. He played more minutes than any player in the league last year when you take the postseason into account. And it was really about 200 plus minutes more. It wasn't like it was just nip and tuck here. He played more minutes than any player in the league last year.
That's
Go ahead. Go ahead, Kevin.
Well, that's a great stat. I like it. But the point is that he made all these comments. So if you're not really into the day-to-day, grind of the NBA and knowing what makes it, if you're just a cursory fan, and because I talk to fans I get stuff from fans all the time, and people saying they don't like Luka, right? Our old pal Barry Horn, he's never liked Luka. He's not a point guard. He believes that a point guard's supposed to be passing the ball all the time. It's like, that went away about 10 years ago,
But
all
he
point
does
guards score
pass.
now.
And he scores.
Well, he does do, but he's the primary scorer.
And rebounds.
That's only been in the last 10 years.
No, I know.
That has been a common thing among point guards. But the point is that if you're not really,
but Kevin, that's the way of the 7 and 8 inning starter, right? The game has just changed. The game has changed.
Sure it has. But the point is that
and like the 6'7" shortstop. I mean,
that's right.
The games are different. It's just completely different now.
It is. But the thing is that if you are not well versed in all of this stuff, and if you can't see past all that, and you're not really a basketball guy, you're really just a gambling guy and a casino guy. And this person who got the team to the finals last year, made some trades, did some good things. If you're listening, and as we just said, if you want to restore the natural order of things in the chain of command, I have to listen to this guy. And boy, he makes a great case. He's been telling me this for 2 months now. And okay, yeah, all right. I'm a little shocked that you want to do this, but okay, go ahead, make this deal. And I think that's exactly what happened.
You again, you don't have we have this is just the start of the ramifications from this deal. You do
Oh,
not
absolutely.
trade a generational talent who is coming into his own, who's not into his own yet. He is not the best. We have not seen the best version of Luka Doncic. You're going to
No, we
see
have
that
not.
in LA for 5, 6, 7 years. He is growing into that player. Or have there been some stumbles around the way? Temperamentally, would you like him to approach things differently? Yeah, but to the level of cutting ties with him and going with, look, I've always liked Anthony Davis. I think he's a very good player, but look at his age, look at his injuries, look at what he has to deal with, and it's going to be much more difficult to sustain a championship level team with Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving as the two focal points versus Luka Doncic. That's all there
Well,
is to it.
the most miserable part of all this will be for Mavericks fans is that long after Kyrie Irving and Anthony Davis are gone, Luka will still
Yes.
be playing. And see
Yes.
what the Mavericks would tell you is that, hey, Luka will be gone too. You know, the way he takes care of himself, in 5 years he'll be done. That's the window. I kept
We'll
hearing
see.
that all the time in the background, was that the window for Luka is like 5 years, and that's going to be it. And it's like, you can gamble and say that if you want to, but if you're wrong, if Luka does start to take care of himself a little bit better, eats a little better, maybe doesn't drink as much beer, all these kind of things that they said about that, I think there's grounded in truth, a lot of that. Uh, what if he all of a sudden does put all that aside and then plays for another 10 years or longer? Because his game ages pretty well, right? I mean,
Well,
it kind of reminds you of the old time centers, guys who came down and all they did was stand there on the blocks and turn around and put the ball back up. They're not doing what you're asking centers to do now. A guy like Anthony Davis, which is why he gets hurt all the time, is because he's playing like he's a 6'5" point guard. You
this
know,
is Kevin. This is why you fall short as a columnist, because you should be writing that column right there, that this had to be done for Luka's growth, that the Mavericks were acting so selflessly. They were so concerned about Luka the person that they knew the only way to help him was to trade him.
Of course, they traded him to the one team to play next to the one guy that might be able to correct all the things you thought were the matter with him. Plus, you traded him to your chief rival in the Western Conference is the Lakers. Who does that? One of the things that Mitch said to me, and I think was a great point. He said they should have shopped it around to two teams. They should have shopped him to the Bucks and said, "We'll give you, what will it take we give you Luka and whatever you want, or not whatever you want, but we'll discuss the second part of that deal for Giannis and Antetokounmpo." Or because apparently, obviously we know Giannis is unhappy there in Milwaukee, and Luka would be a big star there too. Or Boston, and which has any number of players that you could possibly want from that franchise. They got so many players, they got them coming out their ears. Why they would want Luka, I don't know, but I do think that the Bucks thing would have been nice, and at the very least, you would have had some leverage then when you're making that trade. Maybe you could have gotten more from the Lakers if you were bound and determined to do that. Of course, Nico's counter to that would be, I didn't want anybody else to know about this. I didn't want this to get out.
That's again, if you're going to trade him, you're going to trade him, and you have to get the best possible value. See,
Absolutely.
the things in all this is that publicly, the stuff that Nico has said for me raises more questions than it does provide answers, and that's where I'm still stuck. We were talking about Chris Young before, and I was going to bring up this point about like all the moves that they made this winter. You could make a very coherent case for what they were trying to target. Every time I try to reason this thing out, and it's why we're still talking like we just got jilted by or we just our ex-girlfriend or girlfriend dropped us about Luka Doncic, is that It just doesn't. I can't get to a place where it makes rational sense to me.
Because it doesn't.
Well, we'll be,
And I know we've got to wrap this up, but one, the reason you only deal with one team and you don't let it go public is because you know the public backlash is going to stop the deal. You
Yeah,
know
That's
the
right, David.
outrage is going
So
to be
you
so
knew you had the
strong.
answer. You had the answer. What your
Right
how your
there,
fans
that
were going to
tells you.
react, right?
You
Yeah.
knew that. And two, I don't know how much Luka Doncic does or doesn't drink. I don't know how much he vapes. I will tell you, I have covered Hall of Fame NBA players who drank more than Luka Doncic could ever perceive.
Well, it wasn't just the
How's
drinking,
that?
David. It was the token was going on too there. There was a lot of that going on in the NBA as well. Maybe more so than any other league. No, you're absolutely right. It was all silliness, and I think what we ran afoul of here was a general manager who I just didn't see this coming. I don't think there was any way to see Nico Harrison walk into the league and in his introductory press conference talking about being a servant leader, which I don't think I've ever heard a GM use that term. I heard plenty of youth ministers say it, but not a GM. He seemed like the most mild-mannered, soft-spoken guy you could possibly imagine, and he has done nothing but be bold ever since he's been the GM of the Mavericks. And he's made some very good deals, and he's done a lot of things that helped them get to where they were. But I think what it all comes back to, when they talk about, well, we need someone who's going to play better defense and this and that. You made the finals last year. You lost to the Celtics because you didn't have enough offense, not because you didn't have enough defense. So that argument was bogus. It came down to you just didn't like the guy. You don't like you don't like the way he prepares. You don't like the way he handles himself. Whether he's in shape or not is not the question. Nico has in his mind the kind of guy he wants.
Right. And that's the ultimate case of, where you've got to, whether you're a general manager or a coach, there are times when you have got to make the system fit the player rather than make the player fit the system.
There's no question about that. All great, to me, in my mind, all great coaches, and it's harder to say about general managers, but across the spectrum, college, pro, whatever it is, you have to make what you do fit that great player, especially greatness. When a guy's really great, I can remember when at SMU, when I was covering the Southwest Conference, all the other coaches would tell you in the Southwest Conference that Bobby Collins, I lost my thought there. Bobby Collins, the SMU coach, was the best coach in the league because it depended on who he had at quarterback. When he had Lance McElhenney, they ran the triple option. And that was it. That's what Lance did best, and he was great at it. And then when Don King succeeded Lance McElhenney, he threw the ball a lot better than Lance did, but he didn't quite run the option quite as well. So they threw the ball a lot more. With Bobby, it wasn't like, I'm not married to the triple option. If that's what we do, and then that's what we do. But I'm going to do what fits my players the best. He didn't have an ego about it, and that's what you would hope that a coach or a general manager would recognize. But
we have given people so much extra content this week because they didn't get last week's podcast.
Yeah,
because we missed David's presence.
That's what we
got to get out of here.
I think what the thing is that what we don't realize is that David is the one who garbled this whole thing up for us last week. He couldn't be on the podcast. Let's just put it out there, okay? He was on suspension, all right? David was on suspension.
If not then, I certainly will be at some point in the future.
Certainly should be. We may all be suspended for this podcast. All right, that's going to have to do it for ours. We know we've been on here a long time, and we hope you didn't fall asleep while this was all going on. So for anybody who's still awake, we appreciate it. And from everybody in here to everybody out there, thanks, and we'll see you next time.